My dear friends, there is a battle within each of us, a battle between who we are and who we ought to be. You have met your enemy before. He is familiar, for he is yourself, your weaker self, the self that prefers ease over effort, pleasure over purpose, and excuses over excellence. If you listen to him, he will keep you comfortable but never courageous. He will keep you entertained but never enlightened. He will whisper that discipline is unnecessary, that virtue is old-fashioned, and that greatness is for someone else. This version of you must die, not in some dramatic one-time event, but daily, hour by hour, moment by moment. Every time you choose to act with integrity rather than deceit, every time you embrace responsibility instead of avoidance, every time you pursue truth rather than distraction, you are putting to death the weaker self. This is not an easy task, but nothing of true worth is ever easy. You might say, "But I am weak." Yes, you are, but that is not an excuse. The oak tree was once an acorn. The knight was once a squire. Strength is not found in wishing, but in acting. The weak self will protest, pleading for one more day of comfort, one more indulgence, one more delay. But we must not listen. For every moment we allow weakness to reign, we rob the world of our true potential. Some believe that transformation comes from willpower alone, but this is only half true. Strength must be trained, just as the body must be exercised. But there is another power at work, the surrender to truth itself. The greatest men and women did not merely struggle against their vices, they submitted to something higher than themselves. Whether you call it virtue, wisdom, or faith, the truth is the same. The strong man is the one who bows his knee to what is right, not merely to what is easy. So I ask you, who will you be tomorrow? Will you be the same person as today, or will you be better? The choice is yours. But remember, every moment of weakness you allow is another brick in the wall that separates you from your true self. Kill the weak version of yourself and let the real you rise. The struggle between the old self and the new self is a conflict as ancient as humanity itself. It is the tension between who we are at this moment and who we are meant to become. This is not merely a battle of willpower, but a battle of identity. Every person is in motion, either growing towards something greater or retreating into something lesser. There is no standing still. The weak self, the old self, is always seeking to reclaim control, whispering that change is unnecessary or that transformation is too difficult. If left unchecked, this self will dominate, leaving a person stagnant, fearful, and unfulfilled. The weak version of yourself is familiar because it is built from habits, fears, and desires that have governed you for years. It is the self that avoids discomfort, makes excuses, and justifies mediocrity. It is the part of you that says, "I will begin tomorrow," or "This is just who I am." It is the voice that seeks comfort rather than growth, that would rather be entertained than educated, that prefers indulgence over discipline. This version of you is not evil in the dramatic sense. Rather, it is insidious, because it disguises itself as your friend. It tells you that resting a little longer is harmless, that avoiding responsibility will ease your burdens, that there is always time to change later. But these are deceptions, and if you listen to them, they will rule you. The new self, the self you are meant to become, is not built on comfort, but on challenge. It is the version of you that takes ownership of your actions, that does not shy away from responsibility, that hungers for truth and wisdom. It does not make excuses or blame circumstances, for it knows that even the most difficult situations can be used to build character. The new self is willing to suffer in the short term for the sake of something greater in the long term. It does not seek the path of least resistance, but rather the path that leads to genuine strength. One of the greatest mistakes a person can make is to believe that the transition from the old self to the new self will be easy or automatic. Many people think that as they grow older they will naturally become wiser, stronger, or more disciplined. But age alone does not bring transformation. Time merely solidifies whatever habits you cultivate. If you continue in weakness, time will not make you strong. It will only make your weakness more permanent. Change requires deliberate effort. It requires a conscious decision to put to death the weaker self and actively build the stronger self in its place. There is a reason why people resist this change. The weak self is comfortable. It does not like to be challenged. When you begin to break old habits, when you seek to become more disciplined, more courageous, more virtuous, your old self will fight back. It will tempt you with laziness, distractions, and discouragement. It will whisper that the journey is too long, that failure is inevitable, that there is no need to strive for something greater. This is the nature of resistance. It is always strongest when you begin to break free from it. Imagine a man who has spent years making excuses for his failures. He tells himself that his circumstances are to blame, that others have had better opportunities, that he is simply unlucky. This belief allows him to remain as he is. But one day he begins to question this narrative. He starts taking responsibility. He stops blaming others. He realizes that his situation, no matter how difficult, is not an excuse to remain weak. At first, this realization is painful. It forces him to confront truths he has long ignored. But as he continues, something remarkable happens. He begins to change. He becomes stronger, not just physically, but mentally and morally. He no longer seeks the approval of the weak self, but instead seeks the approval of the stronger self he is becoming. The same is true for any person who embarks on this path. Growth is painful because it requires letting go of old patterns, of familiar comforts, of excuses that have shielded us from responsibility. But this pain is not destructive. It is necessary. Just as a muscle must be torn in order to grow, the old self must be broken in order for the new self to emerge. This is not merely a personal struggle. It is a universal. Every great figure in history, every leader, every thinker, every saint has had to wage war against their weaker self. They were not born strong. They became strong through discipline, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to something greater than themselves. The difference between those who achieve greatness and those who remain trapped in mediocrity is not talent or luck. It is the willingness to fight against the old self and embrace the new. But this is not a battle fought once and won forever. The weak self does not die easily. It must be put to death daily. It must be denied in small decisions as well as great ones. Every time you choose to wake up early instead of sleeping in, you are defeating the old self. Every time you choose to speak truth instead of remaining silent out of fear, you are strengthening the new self. Every time you choose to act with integrity when no one is watching, you are building the person you are meant to be. Ultimately, the struggle between the old and new self is a matter of purpose. The weak self lives without purpose, drifting wherever circumstances take it. The strong self moves with intention, driven by something greater than personal comfort. It does not ask what is easy, but rather what is right, and in answering that question it grows into something far greater than it was before. The choice is yours. You can let the weak self rule, making excuses, delaying change, clinging to comfort, or you can take up the challenge, put the old self to death, and step into the person you were created to be. The battle is difficult, but the reward is immeasurable. Every person is meant to grow, to rise above their present state and to step into a life of greater wisdom, strength, and virtue. This is not merely an aspiration, it is a calling woven into the very nature of being human. The desire for growth, for improvement, for something beyond our current condition is not a coincidence. It is evidence that we are not meant to remain as we are. To resist this call is to deny one's own potential, to settle for something lesser when something greater is within reach. Yet many do exactly this. They allow the weaker version of themselves to dictate their choices, to keep them bound in habits of complacency. to convince them that they have already reached the peak of who they can be. But to believe such a lie is to miss the very essence of life itself. There is something tragic about wasted potential. To see a man who could have been strong but chose to remain weak, a mind that could have been sharpened but was dulled by distraction, a soul that could have been noble but was given over to selfishness, this is one of the greatest losses in the world. But it does not happen all at once. The decline of a person's character, the erosion of their ambition, the slow fading of their hunger for truth and virtue, these things happen gradually, almost imperceptibly, until one day they realize they are not who they once aspired to be. This is why the call to higher living must be answered with urgency. There is no room for delay, no safety in postponement. Every day that passes is either a step toward greatness or a step toward mediocrity. There is no neutral ground. To live at a higher level does not mean simply achieving success in worldly terms. A man may acquire wealth, status, and admiration, yet remain utterly stagnant in his soul. True growth is not about external achievement alone. It is about the transformation of the inner self. It is the pursuit of wisdom, the refining of character, the strengthening of will. A person who is growing in these ways will naturally see external success, but the difference is that their success is not empty. It is built upon a foundation of true strength, not mere appearances. The pursuit of a higher life demands sacrifice. It requires giving up things that are comfortable but unhelpful. It requires the discipline to say no to temporary pleasures in order to achieve lasting excellence. Many people want to grow, but few are willing to pay the price. They admire those who have reached great heights, but are unwilling to endure the struggles that made such heights possible. They look at the disciplined man and say, "I wish I had his strength." But they do not wish to endure the long hours of training, the daily sacrifices, the relentless effort that forged him into who he is. They see the wise man and say, "I wish I had his understanding," but they do not wish to spend years in study, in contemplation, in the refining fire of experience. They want the reward without the struggle, the harvest without the labor, but this is not how the world works. Growth demands effort, and without effort there is no transformation. Excuses are the enemy of a higher life. There is no shortage of reasons to remain the same. No end to the justifications for avoiding hard things. Some say they do not have time, but time is not the issue. Priorities are. A man makes time for what he values. Others say they lack talent, as if greatness is only for those born with special gifts. But talent is only a starting point. It is discipline, perseverance, and unshakable commitment that determine success. Some will claim that their circumstances are too difficult, that they are held back by factors beyond their control. But history is filled with men and women who overcame far worse, who refused to be defined by their circumstances, who rose above limitations because they understood that growth is a choice, not a privilege reserved for the fortunate. The true test of a person's commitment to growth is revealed in the small moments. It is not just in grand gestures or public achievements, but in the quiet decisions made when no one is watching. It is in waking up early to pursue a goal when it would be easier to sleep in. It is in choosing to read and learn rather than mindlessly entertain oneself. It is in pushing forward when discouragement whispers that the effort is pointless. Each of these moments is a test, an opportunity to choose between remaining the same or becoming something greater. A higher life is not achieved in an instant. It is built brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. And yet, many never begin the work. They admire the idea of becoming stronger, wiser, and more virtuous, but they hesitate. They wait for the perfect time, for inspiration to strike, for circumstances to align in their favor. But there is no perfect time. There is only now. Those who wait will find that days turn into months, months into years, and one day they will wake up and realize they are the same as they were before, only older, only further from what they could have been. The path to a higher life is demanding, but it is also deeply rewarding. There is a joy that comes from overcoming one's weaknesses, from breaking through barriers, from becoming the person one was meant to be. There is a satisfaction that cannot be found in ease and comfort, a fulfillment that only comes from striving towards something greater. Those who commit to this path do not regret it. They do not look back and wish they had remained as they were. Instead, they look back with gratitude, knowing that every hardship, every sacrifice, every moment of struggle was worth it. The question is not whether you have the potential to live at a higher level. You do. The question is whether you will answer the call, whether you will rise above excuses, whether you will embrace the challenge, whether you will refuse to be ruled by the weaker version of yourself. The choice is yours. You can remain as you are, or you can step forward into something greater. But know this, one day you will look back on your life. You will either see a journey of growth, of strength, of purpose, or you will see a life of wasted potential. The decision is in your hands, and the time to make it is now. Discipline and surrender seem like opposites at first glance. One suggests strength, effort, and control, while the other implies yielding, submission, and letting go. And yet they are not enemies, but allies, working together in the process of transformation. If a person desires to rise above mediocrity, to kill the weaker version of themselves, they must learn to master both. Discipline alone can lead to arrogance, as one believes they are the sole architect of their growth. Surrender alone can lead to passivity, as one waits for change to happen without effort. But together, they create a force capable of reshaping a person entirely. Discipline is the ability to do what must be done, even when it is difficult, even when motivation has faded, even when no one is watching. It is the foundation upon which all growth is built. Without it, good intentions are meaningless. Many people desire change. They dream of becoming wiser, stronger, and more capable, but they lack the discipline to make those dreams a reality. They wish to be excellent, yet they refuse to endure the training required for excellence. They admire those who have achieved great things, but are unwilling to embrace the struggle that produced those achievements. But there is no escaping this truth. Growth demands effort, and effort demands discipline. A disciplined person does not wait for inspiration to act. They do what must be done, regardless of how they feel. If they must wake early to train their body, they do so. If they must read and study to sharpen their mind, they do so. If they must resist distraction to focus on their purpose, they do so. They understand that comfort is the enemy of progress. The weaker self seeks what is easy, what is pleasant, what requires little from them. But the stronger self knows that true satisfaction does not come from ease. It comes from overcoming, from mastering, from striving towards something greater. The power of discipline is that it shapes character. A person who consistently chooses the harder path, who denies themselves momentary pleasure for long-term gain, becomes someone different. They build not just habits but an entirely new identity. They no longer see themselves as weak, as inconsistent, as ruled by their emotions. Instead, they begin to see themselves as capable, as reliable, as someone who can be counted on. And this is no small thing. The way a person views themselves determines the way they live. A man who believes he is weak will always act weakly. A man who believes he is disciplined will always act with discipline. And so, by repeatedly making strong choices, a person rewrites the very way they see themselves. But discipline alone is not enough. Many people have mastered discipline in one area of life but remain incomplete because they have not learned the power of surrender. Surrender is not weakness. It is not the abandonment of effort. Rather, it is the recognition that there are forces greater than oneself, truths that must be submitted to, principles that must be obeyed. A man who relies only on his own willpower will eventually find its limits. He may be strong, but he will never be wise. He may be successful, but he will never have peace. He will struggle and strive, yet always feel as if something is missing. Surrender is the acknowledgement that we are not the ultimate authority. There are truths that do not bend to our desires, realities that do not change simply because we wish them to. A person who surrenders to wisdom becomes wise. A person who surrenders to truth becomes free. A person who surrenders to something greater than themselves, whether it be virtue, morality, or faith, finds a purpose that is unshakable. They no longer rely solely on their own strength, for they have anchored themselves to something beyond themselves. The weak self resists surrender. It wants control. It wants to define its own reality, to justify its own desires, to create its own version of truth. But this is a deception. A person who refuses to submit to wisdom does not become free, they become lost. They are like a ship that refuses to acknowledge the stars, insisting on steering in whatever direction they please. They may feel in control, but they will never reach their destination. True strength is found not in resisting truth, but in aligning oneself with it. There is a paradox here. The person who clings to their own will at all costs becomes enslaved to their weaknesses, but the person who surrenders to truth becomes truly free. The man who refuses to discipline himself becomes a prisoner to his own impulses. The man who refuses to humble himself before wisdom remains blind. But the man who embraces both discipline and surrender, who works tirelessly to grow while also submitting to something greater than himself, becomes unstoppable. He is not swayed by every passing emotion. He is not discouraged by difficulty. He does not crumble under pressure. He stands firm, not because he is perfect, but because he has anchored himself to something unshakable. This is why the pursuit of transformation requires both effort and humility. It requires discipline to put the weaker self to death and surrender to embrace the truth that will replace it. It is not enough to merely resist bad habits. One must also adopt new ones. It is not enough to remove what is harmful. One must also embrace what is good. A person who only fights against weakness, without reaching for strength, will find themselves exhausted. But a person who not only fights, but also seeks wisdom, who not only resists the old self, but also embraces the new, will find themselves changed in ways they never imagined. The path of discipline and surrender is not an easy one, but it is the only one that leads to true transformation. The weak self must be denied daily, not just through sheer willpower, but through the acceptance of higher truths. It is a lifelong battle, one that requires both strength and humility, both action and trust. But those who walk this path will look back one day and see that every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of difficulty was worth it, for they will have become something far greater than they ever could have been by simply remaining the same. Growth is not meant to be a solitary journey. The battle to overcome the weaker self, to step into a life of strength, wisdom, and virtue is difficult enough on its own. To attempt it in isolation is not only unwise but dangerous. Many have fallen not because they lacked the desire to change, but because they tried to do it alone. They relied solely on their own understanding, their own willpower, their own strength, and when those things failed, as they inevitably do, they had no one to help them rise again. This is why the pursuit of transformation is not meant to be carried out in isolation. The stronger self is not built in a vacuum, but in relationship with others, through guidance, accountability, and shared wisdom. One of the greatest dangers of walking alone is blindness to one's own weaknesses. A man who has no one to challenge him, no one to sharpen him, no one to correct him, will inevitably deceive himself. He may believe he is growing when he is simply moving in circles. He may convince himself that he is strong when in reality he is merely comfortable. But another set of eyes, another voice of wisdom, can reveal what he cannot see. The weak self thrives in isolation because it avoids challenge. It prefers to remain in the shadows, where its faults are hidden, its complacency unchallenged. But true transformation happens in the light, in the presence of others who can speak truth, who can call out weakness, who can encourage when the journey grows difficult. There is a reason why the greatest minds, the strongest leaders, and the most virtuous men throughout history have always sought counsel. Even the wisest recognize that their own understanding is limited, that their own perspective is incomplete. They do not isolate themselves in arrogance, believing they have nothing to learn, but instead surround themselves with those who sharpen their thinking, who challenge their assumptions, who hold them accountable. This is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of wisdom. A person who refuses to seek guidance, who believes they can grow entirely on their own, is not strong but foolish. Accountability is one of the most powerful tools for transformation. Left to ourselves, we are prone to inconsistency. We set goals and then abandon them when they become difficult. We make commitments and then justify our failure to keep them. But when we are accountable to others, when we invite someone to hold us to our word, we become far more likely to follow through. There is something about knowing that another person is watching, that another person will ask whether we have done what we said we would do, that strengthens resolve. This is not because we seek to impress others, but because we recognize that isolation breeds weakness while accountability fosters discipline. The weak self resists accountability. It desires freedom from responsibility, freedom from expectation, freedom from the uncomfortable pressure of being held to a higher standard. It whispers that true strength is independence, that needing others is a sign of failure. But this is a lie. True strength is found in humility, in the willingness to admit that growth requires the wisdom, support, and challenge of others. The man who isolates himself does not become stronger, he becomes stagnant. The man who walks with others, who allows himself to be sharpened, who embraces accountability, becomes unshakable. Beyond accountability, there is also the need for encouragement. The journey of transformation is long, and there will be moments of exhaustion, discouragement, and doubt. There will be times when progress seems invisible, when failure feels inevitable. In these moments, the presence of others can make the difference between pressing forward and giving up. A word of encouragement, a reminder of why the journey began, a simple act of support. These things have the power to reignite determination, to restore perspective, to keep a person moving forward when they might otherwise falter. But not all company is beneficial. Just as the right people can strengthen and sharpen, the wrong people can corrupt and weaken. Many have failed in their pursuit of growth, not because they lacked effort, but because they surrounded themselves with those who pulled them back into old patterns, who reinforced their weaknesses, who encouraged complacency rather than transformation. The weak self seeks out such company because it desires validation rather than challenge, comfort rather than growth. But the stronger self chooses relationships wisely, surrounding itself with those who will push, refine, and uplift. This is why seeking out mentors, role models, and like-minded companions is essential. A mentor provides wisdom gained through experience, guiding the journey with insight that cannot be acquired alone. A role model serves as a vision of what is possible, demonstrating through their life what strength, discipline, and virtue look like in practice. And companions, true companions, walk alongside, sharing the struggles, holding one another accountable, pressing forward together. These relationships are not mere additions to the journey, they are necessary for its success. The weak self will always seek solitude because solitude allows it to remain unchanged. It does not want its flaws exposed, its habits questioned, its mediocrity challenged. But the person who truly desires transformation will reject isolation. They will humble themselves enough to seek guidance. They will welcome accountability, even when it is uncomfortable. They will embrace encouragement, knowing that no one can walk this path alone. At the end of the journey, those who surrounded themselves with wisdom, accountability, and encouragement will look back and see how much stronger they became because of it. They will recognize that their transformation was not the result of their effort alone, but of the influence, challenge, and support of those who walked beside them. And they will see that, in choosing to reject isolation, they did not lose independence but gained something far greater, the strength to become all they were meant to be.